If you could go back, not to change everything, but to do one thing differently, what would it be? Most people, when they sit with that question long enough, find that the answer is smaller than they expected. Not a career choice. Not a financial decision. Something quieter. Marilyn Monroe spent most of her life in motion, moving from set to set, from relationship to relationship, from one version of herself to another, in response to what each new situation seemed to require. She was, from a very young age, someone who had learned that her value in a room was contingent on performing something. Her beauty, her warmth, her particular kind of radiant availability to whoever needed her to be present. That was the world she had been given, and she navigated it with more intelligence and more complexity than it ever quite gave her credit for. But in her private conversations, with the friends and therapists and rare confidants she trusted with the fuller version of herself, she sometimes spoke about what she wished had been different. Not the big things, mostly. Not the marriages, or the studio contracts, or the particular roles she'd taken or not taken. Something smaller than any of those. She said she wished she had trusted herself more. She meant this in a specific way, not in the confident, assertive way the phrase is usually used. She had plenty of that kind of confidence in her instincts about her work. She meant something more personal. She wished she had trusted the quieter part of herself, the part that wanted stillness sometimes, that needed to be alone, that found most of what the social world offered her exhausting and hollow underneath the sparkle. She had spent so much of her life performing warmth and charm and availability that she had sometimes lost access to what she actually wanted, or whether she wanted to be in that room at all. She said, in one of her most honest conversations, that she would have given herself more permission to say no. Not to the big things. She already knew how to fight for what mattered in her work. But to the small things. The parties she went to because someone expected her to. The people she let into her life because it was easier than explaining why she needed less. The version of herself she kept performing in private as well as in public, because she wasn't always sure anyone wanted the quieter one. She would have trusted more that the quieter one was worth protecting. That the person underneath the performance, uncertain, sensitive, genuinely funny, genuinely sad, genuinely complicated, was not a disappointment to be managed, but the actual person, the one worth knowing, the one who deserved protection and quiet, and the occasional right to say, "Not tonight." That was the second chance she wished for. Not a different life, just a different relationship with the life she had. More trust in her own quieter needs. More willingness to protect the private self from the constant demand to be the public one. Maybe you felt something like that too. Maybe there are things you do, commitments you keep, performances you give, versions of yourself you maintain, not because you want to, but because someone expects it. Because saying no would disappoint someone. Because the easier path is to keep showing up in the form other people are used to, even when it costs you something. And maybe, over the years, that pattern has made the quieter version of yourself harder to access. The one that needs rest. The one that doesn't want to make conversation at that particular gathering. The one that sometimes just wants a quiet evening with no obligation to be anything for anyone. Here's something gentle to consider. Protecting that quieter version of yourself isn't selfishness. It's maintenance. The same way a car needs to return to the garage between long drives, or a musician needs silence between performances, the self that you bring to the people who depend on you needs time away from being brought to anyone. Time to exist without purpose or performance. Just itself. Giving yourself permission to say no, not to everything, not to the things that genuinely matter, but to the things that don't, the things you do out of habit or social obligation or fear of disappointing someone who doesn't actually need you there. That's the second chance Marilyn said she wished she'd given herself. It's still available. Right now. This week. Marilyn Monroe was surrounded by people who needed her to be Marilyn, a particular version of warmth and beauty and availability that she had in some ways created, and in other ways had created for her. And what she wanted, privately, was permission to be nobody's version of anything for a little while. Just herself. Whatever that looked like on a Tuesday when nobody was watching. You have that permission. You probably always have. But permission, until it's claimed, exists only in theory. The claiming of it is the act that makes it real. The first no you say to something that doesn't need you. The first evening you spend in exactly the way you want, with no explanation owed to anyone. The first time you let the quieter version of yourself have a little room, not as a compromise, but as a right. Maybe this is the week to claim that permission. Not with grand declarations, not by withdrawing from the people you love, just by saying no to one thing that was never really yours to carry, and saying yes, quietly, to an evening of being only yourself. And there's something worth saying, too, for the people who struggle with this for a different reason. Not because others demand too much, but because they themselves find it hard to stop. Who feel guilty when they rest. Who fill every empty hour with something useful, something productive, something that justifies the time spent. Who have a voice in their head that says, you should be doing something. That voice is also a kind of performance. A performance for an internal audience that never quite feels satisfied. And quieting it, even briefly, requires the same kind of trust that Marilyn was talking about. The trust that you don't have to earn your rest. That you don't have to justify your existence by constant productivity. That you are allowed to simply be for an afternoon without any output at all. Marilyn Monroe's second chance wish was quiet, not a do-over of any big decision, but a small, daily, ongoing act of trust in herself. The trust that the quieter version of her was enough. Was, in fact, more than enough. Was the real person worth protecting and worth knowing underneath everything the world had needed her to be. If you're watching this tonight, maybe your quieter version is worth that same trust. Maybe this week is a good time to let it have a little more room. There's something else Marilyn Monroe said in a different conversation that connects to this. She said that most of her life she had been trying to figure out who she was when no one was watching. And that she had spent so much of her time being watched, literally, by cameras and crowds, but also in her private life, by people who have their own ideas about who she was and what she was supposed to be. That it had taken her a very long time to understand that who she was when no one was watching was actually who she was. Not the performance, the quiet, not the warmth turned outward toward everyone who needed it, the smaller, more private version that existed in the early morning before any of that started. Most of us, if we're honest, could say something similar. We have become very skilled at the version of ourselves that the world sees, the capable one, the cheerful one, the one who knows what to say in any situation. And sometimes, in the stillness of an early morning or a late night, we catch a glimpse of the version that exists before any of that starts. The one that's a little less certain, a little more curious, a little more in need of tenderness than the outer version ever lets on. That inner version is not a weakness to be overcome. It's the real one, and it deserves to be known by you first, and then, carefully, by the people closest to you. The ones who can handle it. The ones who love you not for the performance, but for what's underneath it. Marilyn Monroe spent much of her life giving her warmth and her presence and her particular kind of light to the world. Freely, generously, sometimes at real cost to herself. And what she said she would do differently wasn't to stop giving those things, just to protect some of it, to reserve some warmth for herself, to let the quieter, more uncertain, more genuinely human version of herself have a seat at the table, not just in the private hours, but in how she approached her whole life. That's the second chance available to you, too. Not a dramatic reinvention, not a complete change of direction, just a small, daily, ongoing act of letting the quieter version of yourself have a little more room, a little more say in how the days go, a little more trust that this version, uncertain, sensitive, genuinely complicated, genuinely real, is exactly enough. So take a slow breath, and maybe this week give yourself one small second chance. Not to change everything, just to do one thing differently in the direction of yourself and what you actually need. That's always a beginning.